Who is Sonia Sotomayor? By Megan Stine, Chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8, Higher and Higher. Life was good for Judge Sotomayor. She loved her work and her friends. The people who worked for her were like a second family. Sometimes she invited them home with her to have burgers and play cards. Her diabetes was under control now, too. She was very careful about what she ate. She always took her insulin when she needed it. She sometimes gave herself shots at meals, right in front of people. Sonia's life could have gone on like that forever. But on June 25, 1997, she got a call from President Bill Clinton. He wanted to appoint her to a higher court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Sonia knew what that meant. It meant she would have to go through a lot of interviews again. She would have to answer questions in front of Congress again. Then Congress would have to vote to approve her. The whole thing could take a long time, but it was a huge honor. It was also a signal that someday a president might choose her for the Supreme Court. As before, Senator Moynihan stood up for Sonia in Congress. So did the other senator from New York, Alphonse D'Amato. 10,000 people wrote letters to support her. Still, Congress stalled. For a long time, they wouldn't vote. Why not? Was it because some congressmen didn't want a Hispanic woman to have a chance on being on the Supreme Court someday? The stalling trick was used a lot, especially when appointing people of color. Other nominees became judges quite quickly, but minorities and women often had to wait 2 or 3 years. Finally, though, in October 1998, the Senate voted in favor of Sonia. On November 6th, there was a swearing-in ceremony. Many famous people were there, so were Sonia's family and friends. The 12 other judges from the Second Circuit Court were there too, including Jose Cabranes. He was now an important judge himself, and he swore her in. In court, she would be sitting right alongside him. After the ceremony, Sonia and her family celebrated, and that night there was another special event. Sonia's mother, Selena, was getting married. She was in love with a man named Omar Lopez. Sonia, as a judge, performed their marriage ceremony. Sonia had a wonderful job, close family, and dear friends. There was nothing more she could ask for or expect. Or was there? Chapter 9, 1 of 9. For the next 10 years, Sonia not only served as a judge, she also taught classes at 6 different law schools. She gave speeches all over the country. Then, one day, in 2009, she got a call from the White House. One of the 9 Supreme Court justices was going to retire. President Barack Obama would have to pick a replacement. "Do not tell anyone," the White House told Sonia. Sonia was on the short list of people President Obama was considering. There were 3 other people on the list. Sonia knew what this meant. If she was nominated, there would be more interviews, more questions from Congress, more waiting. Finally, the Senate would have to vote. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is one of 3 branches of the U.S. government. It is the judiciary branch. The other 2 branches are the executive, the president, and the legislative, Congress. Each branch has different powers. The Supreme Court has the power to decide whether laws are fair according to our Constitution. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court, an uneven number. That way, there can never be a tie vote. There are no juries to decide cases at the Supreme Court. The justices all listen to each case. Then they vote on how to rule. Sometimes the justices agree, but they often disagree. Some votes are 5-4. That means only 5 people agreed about how to rule on the case. The other 4 disagreed. The majority always wins. Supreme Court judges are appointed for life. But it would be even harder this time. Senators are very careful about voting for Supreme Court justices. Why? Because the Supreme Court has a lot of power. It makes decisions about big issues that affect everyone every day. As for Sonia, she worried about how being on the Supreme Court would change her life. She would be famous. She wouldn't have much privacy. Was it worth it? Yes, Sonia decided. She wanted to try. She wanted minority children to know that they were just like her. They could grow up to achieve their biggest dreams if they worked hard enough. The next few months were crazy. First, FBI agents came to visit. They asked questions about her life. The president wanted to be sure Sonia didn't have any problems or ugly secrets in her past. The White House also called her doctor to ask about her diabetes. The president needed to know that Sonia would be healthy enough to serve on the Supreme Court for many years. Next, Sonia went to the White House to meet the president in person. That day, she also met Vice President Joe Biden and many members of the White House staff. Finally, she was told to wait for a phone call on May 25th. When it came a little after 8 p.m., Sonia was thrilled, but she had to hurry. Somehow, she had to get from New York City to Washington, D.C. that night. The White House didn't want her to fly. They were afraid reporters would find out. They wanted to keep it a big secret until the next day. So a friend of Sonia's drove her to Washington, D.C. in a rainstorm. They didn't arrive till after 2 a.m. Her mother, brother, and other family members were already there. Some family members had even flown in from Puerto Rico to be part of this historic event. The next morning, Sonia and her family stood in the East Room of the White House with President Obama. Reporters and TV cameras were there. President Obama announced that he was naming her as the next Supreme Court Justice. She would be only the third woman and the first Hispanic ever to sit on the court. Then, Sonia made a short speech. She said that as a child, she had never imagined, even in her wildest dreams, this would happen. For the next few weeks, Sonia's life was a whirlwind. She had to get ready for the Senate hearings. Those were the meetings when senators would ask her questions. The hearings would be on television. If she didn't answer questions well, she would look bad. The senators might not vote for her. Sonia decided to try to meet as many senators as she could ahead of time. Of the 100 U.S. senators, she met with 89. On one visit to Washington, D.C., she tripped in the airport and fractured her ankle. That didn't stop her. She limped into the White House. Later that day, she had a cast put on her leg. One senator even signed her cast. The hearings were scheduled for July 2009. The White House helped Sonia get ready. They held practice sessions, sometimes for 10 hours a day. They told her what suits to wear each day and what color nail polish to use. Sonia liked bright red nails. The White House told her to use a plain color instead. In the first day of the hearings, Sonia sat alone at a big table. In front of her were 16 senators. They sat up high behind a raised desk. It looked like a courtroom. The senators questioned her over and over for 4 long days. Finally, the hearings were over. 3 weeks later, on August 6, 2009, the Senate voted. They agreed to put Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court. On August 8th, she was sworn in to the Supreme Court twice. One ceremony was private. The other was in front of photographers and reporters. Chief Justice John Roberts gave her the oath both times. Sonia put her hand on a Bible, while Selena held it smiling. After that, the celebrating and the parties began. Many famous people wanted to congratulate Sonia. 2 people wrote songs for Sonia. President Obama had a party for her at the White House. Jennifer Lopez, the famous singer, also had a big party at her mansion on Long Island, New York. J-Lo and Sonia were both from Puerto Rican families. They had both grown up in the Bronx. Although Sonia had already been sworn in as a judge, there was one more ceremony to be held. It wouldn't be official until then. The night before the ceremony, Sonia went out partying and dancing with her family. Even though she was about to become a Supreme Court justice, she didn't want to start acting differently. She danced the salsa and sang in front of the whole crowd. After all, that's what President Obama had asked her to do: stay herself, stay connected to the world she had come from. The ceremony was held the next day, September 8th. It took only 4 minutes. Sonia sat in her robes on the bench in the Supreme Court for the first time. She felt humble and proud and in awe of the world she was about to enter. The Supreme Court opened the day after Sonia was sworn in. The court is in session from the first Monday in October to late June or early July. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a habit of wearing a lace collar with her black judge's robe. She gave Sonia Sotomayor a similar lace collar to wear on her first day on the court. Sonia wore it for a while, but then stopped. She isn't really the lacy type. Women of the Supreme Court. The first woman appointed to the Supreme Court was Sandra Day O'Connor. President Ronald Reagan appointed her in 1981. She retired in 2006. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the second woman on the court. She was appointed in 1993 by President Bill Clinton. In 2010, President Obama appointed the fourth woman to the Supreme Court, Justice Elena Kagan. Sonia took her place among the other 8 justices. Her knees were shaking. As always, she wasn't sure she was ready for the job. But as always, she knew what to do. Jump in, learn fast, and work hard. That's what she had always done, at Catholic school, at Princeton, and at Yale. That's what she had done in the DA's office in New York and at her law firm. She had done it when learning to sit on a judge's bench. It's what her mother had taught her to do, by example. Sonia had been doing it her whole life. Why stop now? Some major Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court has decided some very important cases over the years. In 1954, the court decided that it was not legal to make black children attend different schools from white children. The case was called Brown versus Board of Education. Another important case was called Miranda versus Arizona. In that case, the Supreme Court said that criminal suspects had certain rights when they were arrested, including the right to remain silent and to hire a lawyer. Recently, the Supreme Court settled a big case about gay marriage, Obergefell versus Hodges. The court said that same-sex couples had a right to get married in all 50 states. The vote was 5-4 in favor. Sonia Sotomayor voted for it, along with 4 other justices. Timeline of Sonia Sotomayor's life. 1954, born in New York City on June 25th. 1957, brother Juan is born. Family moves to Bronxdale Houses housing project. 1961, diagnosed with diabetes. 1963, father dies. 1972, graduates from Cardinal Spellman High School. 1976, graduates from Princeton University, marries Kevin Noonan. 1979, earns law degree from Yale Law School, hired as assistant district attorney in New York City. 1983, gets divorced. 1984, joins Pavia and Harcourt law firm. 1992, appointed a U.S. District Court judge. 1995, ends Major League Baseball strike. 1997, becomes a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. 2009, sworn in as a justice on the Supreme Court. 2013, My Beloved World is published. Timeline of the world. 1898, United States takes military control of Puerto Rico. 1921, discovery of insulin. 1952, Puerto Rico becomes a U.S. Commonwealth. 1961, the Berlin Wall built. 1966, National Organization for Women, NOW, funded. 1971, computer floppy disk introduced. 1974, U.S. President Richard Nixon resigns. 1981, the first woman, Sandra Day O'Connor, is appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. 1987, The Simpsons appear on TV for the first time. 1994 to 1995, Major League Baseball strike. 1997, the British return Hong Kong to China. 2005, YouTube is invented. 2008, Barack Obama becomes the first African American person ever elected president of the United States. 2009, the New York Yankees win their 27th World Series championship. 2012, Barack Obama re-elected president of the United States.